In 1901, in New York, a man entered the records twice, once with his name, once with his face, but the face was not singular. The census ledger filed him as one patient in one bed. Ward D, bed 14, male, age 34, laborer. And yet the photograph taken that same year told a different story. On the card, two profiles emerged where one should have been. One turned toward the lamp, the other fused beside it, silent, unfinished, but watching. This was no mirror, no twin, no trick of glass. This was one man whose own skin betrayed arithmetic, carrying not one identity, but two. Doctors tried to correct the record with ink. They wrote, "Not compatible." Nurses whispered another phrase in the ward at night, "Not aligned." Clerks pressed their pens too hard, leaving dents beneath the ink, as though the paper itself resisted closure. The newspapers gave it one line: a growth, an error of surgery, a curiosity best forgotten. But the photograph did not forget. Cabinet, card, matte finish, emulsion that still holds its whites and its blacks with unnatural clarity. Even now, it refuses to age. And before we go further, if you wish to help keep these files open, leave a like and subscribe. It ensures you'll be here when the next drawer slides open, and it tells us this long descent is worth continuing. This is not hurried. We turn the pages as they were written, slowly, carefully, allowing silence to breathe as loudly as ink. Before we begin in earnest, tell us where you're listening from and the exact time. These files travel strangely, and it helps to know who else is keeping watch, because this is not a story of a man alone. It is the story of a file that refused to close, a photograph that refused to fade, and a system that preferred silence to truth. The year was 1901, the same year the subway tunnels first began to cut beneath Manhattan. The same year President McKinley was shot in Buffalo, leaving Theodore Roosevelt to step suddenly into office. A modern century had arrived, and yet, inside New York's institutions of care, the air was still old. Hospitals, almshouses, and asylums did not run on compassion. They ran on numbers, bed counts, sheets laundered, meals rationed, outcomes tallied in columns, recovered, improved, unchanged, died. Columns that reassured donors their money had not been wasted, and reassured the city that order still held that ward. D was one of these machines. Rows of iron beds, each painted white, each numbered in chalk on the wall above. Patients identified not by story, but by slot. Bed 14 was his slot. The man with two faces. His admission line survives. May 11th, 1901. Male, 34. Occupation, laborer. Religion, left blank. Remarks, a dash. No diagnosis. No observation. Just refusal. On paper, the refusal looks ordinary. Clerks often left blanks, but the dash is darker, pressed harder. Under lamplight, it cuts deeper than the rest of the ink, as though the hand tried to carve silence into the fiber. Outside, the city surged forward. Elevated trains thundered overhead. Electric lamps buzzed. Stock tickers spit endless numbers across Wall Street. But inside Ward D, the old shadows lingered. Nurses whispered about the second face. Some crossed themselves when they passed his bed. One boy who peered through the window swore that the lips moved, though no sound came. The official log avoided such words. Temperature 98. Respiration even. Appetite reduced. Skin cold, not clammy. Ordinary notes written in ordinary ink. But tucked among them, one quiet fracture. Face presented left. Second profile in repose. A phrase designed to look clinical, but impossible to explain. The copperplate script of the clerk faltered on those words. The letters lean too far. The nib pressed too long. Every other entry that day is neat, but here the line hesitates. That hesitation is the city's hesitation too. To admit such a man is to admit contradiction into the ledger. And contradiction is dangerous. Numbers that move get punished. Numbers that hold get paid dot, so the institutions circled around him. A file too dangerous to close, too dangerous to describe. Filed as stable by refusing to speak at all. This is the environment where his case lived. A city insisting on modernity. And a ward that whispered to itself when the lights went down. You're right. Thanks for catching that. Here is beat 3. Fully expanded to roughly 600 words. In pure narration with the midpoint CTA woven in. The first witness is the matron. Her diary lives in brown paper and thread. Most entries harmless. Broth too thin. Sheets worn to gauze. A patient who sings nonsense after midnight. Then, in a smaller hand and darker ink, a line that does not belong to housekeeping at all. The quiet one watches in my place. She does not write which eye, which angle. She does not even write his name. She writes only that she felt relieved, as if some second sentry had taken her post, so she could sit without fear asleep. On the next page, she adds a private superstition. Learned my hours, then scratches it out with 3 neat strokes that fail to erase the pressure beneath. The second witness is an attendant, whose words remain because the donor demanded them years later. His deposition runs together without commas, without mercy for the clerk, tasked with copying it. He lies still. He lies facing left the other, lies right. I did not speak to it. I will not. The clerk tries to fit breath into the line, adding small marks like splints, but the refusal survives the repair. He repeats lies 5 times, as if the word carries both meanings at once, prone and untrue. A body that is horizontal, and a truth that is bent. A third witness speaks from the margin of a condolence letter, a different ink pressed into the paper. Like a whisper added after the envelope should have been sealed. The quiet one walks the garden row at night. She describes a pale figure beyond the window, not the patient, but the presence within him, crossing the path that nurses used to bring. In coal. She insists she heard no footfall, only the hush of skirts. The ward doors were locked that week. The note should therefore be impossible. It remains official speech, pretends nothing has changed. The ward log for those days is sober. Temperature 98, respiration even, appetite reduced, skin cold, not clammy. Yet, inside a single entry, a phrase that cannot exist if the rest is true. Face presented left. Second profile in repose. It is the sort of language a cautious hand uses, when it must admit and yet cannot confess. Presented is a polite word. Repose is a safe one. Still, the second profile has entered the book. Another witness hides in the laundry room. A washerwoman says the pillowcases from bed 14 carry a smooth stain in the shape of an unkissed. Mouth, not blood, not bile, something oil dark that will not surrender to lie. She starts turning the cases inside out before washing them, as if that might persuade the mark to belong to the cloth instead of the man. A visiting chaplain, asked to bless the ward, writes 1 line in his pocket calendar and never transfers it to the parish register. I felt observed while my hand lay on his brow, as though the prayer had 2 listeners, but only 1 breath. He does not return. None of these voices are mine. The matron feels watched. The attendant refuses to speak to it. The neighbor sees it walking. The laundry finds a mouth where a mouth should not be. The chaplain senses 2 listeners. Contradictions draw a tight circle around the same point. When a system punishes what moves, witnesses learn to disagree without dispersing. Their disagreement is the proof. If this reached you at night, you are not listening alone. Others are here in other rooms, other hours, hands on their own desks, following the same dents in the same paper. If you want to sit with us when the next drawer slides open, subscribe. Think of it less as a button and more as a standing place reserved for you in the archive. The file tries to discipline all of this into obedience. It files the matron as anecdote, the attendant as hysteria, the neighbor as gossip, the washerwoman as error, the chaplain as impression. Then it keeps their words anyway. Paper is not memory. It is creation. But even creation cannot always overrule what it invites onto itself. The refrain that began in ink begins to migrate through mouths. Not compatible, not aligned. The syllables repeat in different rooms until they sound less like judgments and more like a spell. Beneath them, the smaller, quieter counterframe persists. The quiet one watches. You may strike a sentence from a ledger. You cannot stop a room from learning its own hours. That is how the pattern forms, not in agreement, but in a ring of refusal around a fact the system declines to name. Doctors tried to master the second face the way they mastered all anomalies, by naming. They reached for Greek, the language that lent authority to uncertainty. Diprosopis, a word heavy enough to sound like an answer, empty enough to cover ignorance. In ward notes, another term appeared, lesion, and in one physician's private paper, later folded into the file, the single word growth. But the nurses who washed him disagreed with the language. They described the surface as skin, not mass, warm to the touch, not cool as excised tissue should be, responsive under cloth, the lips tightening when water brushed them, though no sound ever followed. The eyelids sealed, yes, but restless beneath. Twitching as though straining toward light dot, an attempt was made to measure, to reduce contradiction to numbers. Circumference, 8 3/8 inches. Skull breadth, 5. Yet beside the figures, a faint erasure. The first number had been 9 before someone rubbed it into smudge. Arithmetic itself was disciplined, cut down to match what could be defended in front of donors. Numbers that moved got punished. Numbers that held got paid. Then came the photograph. Cabinet card, embossed with the studio name, H. Granger and Sons. The first exposure produced nothing unusual. The man sat upright, primary profile catching the lamplight. But the fused visage beside him behaved differently. It did not reflect, it absorbed. Light sank into it like ink into cloth. On the developed plate, the second profile darkened, then cleared. Darkened again, then cleared. When compared against controls, the notes read only. Image unchanged. A second. Attempt was made weeks later. 2 prints were taken on separate days. Every other patient photographed in the series showed subtle change growth of hair, shift in posture, variation in light. His images were identical, down to the crease in the collar. No drift, no difference. Not similar identical. The technician refused to write impossible. Instead, he borrowed the language of weather. Image clouds, then clears. As if the photograph were rehearsing, playing out a cycle only, it could perform dot. The file shows no further experiments. No surgeries attempted, no detailed diagnosis pursued. Not because interest had waned, but because the system had learned its strategy. When anomalies threaten arithmetic, the safest mechanism is not incision, but refusal. Rename, reduce, absorb, and above all, delay. Design, not error. Silence as treatment. The second face survived, not in life, but in the margins of paper, in the gloss of photographs, in the erased number still visible if the page is tilted against light. Exposure came not from confession, but from arithmetic. In July, the ward placard listed 22 beds. But the requisition for meals tallied 24 trays. An asterisk sat beside bed 14, 2 trays to 1 bed. The mark was small, almost apologetic, but pressed darker than any other note. A clerk's hesitation disguised as ink. Inspectors. Arrived weeks later, conducting their routine survey of outcomes. Recovered, improved, unchanged, died. The categories. Balanced neatly until they reached the file of bed 14. The dash with a diagnosis should have been stood out like a wound. To justify it, the staff produced the photograph. The inspectors studied the card. On the left, a man's face ordinary in every respect. On the right, a fused profile, lips. Sealed, eye pressed shut, yet unmistakably a second visage. No scarring, no stitching, no shadow play. The inspectors asked for another photograph, something more recent. The ward produced a second plate, identical to the first. No change, no drift. The report does not write impossible. It writes distortion. It writes anomaly. It files the card back into its envelope and closes the drawer harder than necessary. But in the margin of a clerk's personal notebook, later recovered, the truth leaks. Image rehearses itself. Do not present again. After that summer, the record grows silent. The ledger carries no more notations. No death. No discharge. No transfer. The line that began on May 11th simply stops. A life not ended, not continued, only struck from arithmetic. The city moved on. Donors were reassured. Inspectors filed their reports. Newspapers forgot, but the photograph remained. In its surface, the second face still absorbs light, still refuses to fade. Even now, it darkens, then clears, then returns, as though time itself rehearses the impossibility each time it is seen. The man himself left no official ending. No burial record, no death certificate, no transfer slip. Just absence. His line in the ledger did not close. It simply stopped, as though the file itself had decided that silence was a safer category than truth. But silence never holds forever. Residues bled through the margins. The matron's diary entry still whispers. The quiet one watches in my place. The attendant's deposition still trembles with refusal. He lies left, the other lies right. I will not speak to it. The neighbor's margin still insists. The quiet one walks the garden row at night, and the photograph, unchanged, continues to rehearse its cycle. Darkens, clears, returns. Each time it is examined, the same pattern repeats. One profile reflects. Light, the other drinks it. One obeys time, the other resists. A century later, under ultraviolet, the archivists wrote the same phrase the technicians had written in 1901. Subject retains baseline. Words chosen to sound clinical, but heavy with unease doubt. It is tempting to frame this as folklore. A ghost story. About a man with two faces. A curiosity to unsettle, then to forget. But the truth is sharper and colder. This is not folklore. This is bureaucracy. Hospitals, donors, and clerks did what they always do with anomalies. They renamed. They delayed. They refused. Backlog optics demanded the columns balance. Donor tranquility demanded serenity. Language borrowed from machinery compatible, aligned, processing offered anesthesia. Numbers that moved were punished. Numbers that held were paid. So the ledger taught itself to survive by erasure. And so a man was erased, not by death, but by silence. His body carried two faces. His file carried none. What survives is not conclusion, but residue. Ink pressed too hard into paper. Numbers erased into smudge. Testimony scattered across margins. And a photograph that refuses to fade, still whispering a warning to anyone who looks too long. Not compatible, not aligned, not concluded. Don't close the file. Another waits. If you want to sit with us for that one, you know where to find it. Subscribe, and the drawer will be open when you return.